I've always liked to think of myself as somewhat of an urban explorer. There are a ton of derelict buildings in my hometown, and I have visited each one. I found nothing of interest in many of them, but I did find a group of mannequins that had been set up as if they were having a dinner party. I was running out of places to explore when I thought of the Miller Quarry, which had been closed for nearly 20 years. It used to be the main employer in our town, until the money all ran out and everyone was laid off. It turned our once prosperous town into a bit of a ghost town. It took me almost a half hour to cycle there, and I had to hop over a fence to get inside. I stupidly got my trousers caught on the top of the railing, and I had to rip them to get off. I went through my bag of supplies and made sure that I had everything that I could possibly need. I made my way inside while gazing around at all the machinery that now lay rusted and forgotten. I was making plans on how I should spend my day as I reached the top of the quarry. I stopped dead in my tracks while peering downwards at what lay beneath. There appeared to be what looked like a giant man who covered nearly the entire floor of the quarry. He was wearing a robe that was torn in many places and had long white hair. He lay unmoving on the ground, with his head lying to the side as if he was asleep. I stood there speechless, while my brain tried to comprehend what I was looking at. I began to feel lightheaded and realized that I hadn't breathed in nearly a minute. I took a few deep breaths and started moving into the quarry. My eyes never left his face as I walked towards him. His size dwarfed anything that I had ever seen in my life. My best estimate is that his body was about a mile or more in length. Everything about him was incredible, and I stood in awe of what I had found. I initially thought that he had fallen from the sky, but noticed that the ground around him was flat as if he had just laid down. If he had fallen then there would have been an earthquake due to the force of his body hitting the ground. I made my way towards his face and stopped when I saw his eyes. It looked like something had been cutting into his eyes, as I could see bloody pulp dripping down his face. I did a full 360 turn, as I felt like something was watching me. I couldn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else here. The quarry was lined up with shadows. An entire army could be around me, and I might not even have seen them. I once again turned back to his face, and watched in amazement as one of his eyes began twitching. I let out a scream, as a black demon ripped its way out. It launched itself into the sky and landed behind me. I spun around to face it and felt fear running through my body. The creature looked like a crow, but the proportions were all wrong, as it was twice the height of me. It stared at me and seemed to be judging me. It let out a ear-splitting caw and threw itself into the air. Its cry was answered by dozens of other cries, as dozens of similar creatures appeared from crevices hidden along the length of the quarry. They began flying over my head, which reminded me of vultures circling their prey. Blood was dripping down from them, as they had obviously been feasting on his flesh. I barely had time to react when one of them suddenly spiraled down towards me. I threw myself to one side, but its claws cut into my shoulder. I began to panic as I knew there was no way that I could get past these abominations. I had to avoid 2 more attacks and was near exhaustion at this point. I made a split-second decision and began racing towards the giant's body. The cries from above became deafening as I had got to his face. His mouth was partly open and I began to push my way inside. I felt something brush against my back as I finally managed to make it inside. One of the crows was trying to follow me, but wasn't able to open the mouth any further. It pushed its claws in a desperate attempt to drag me out, but I retreated away until it finally gave up. I let out a sigh of relief and looked around at what now could end up being my prison. The mouth was being lit up by a strange orange light that was coming from his flesh. I expected there to be a rancid smell due to him being dead, but it strangely smelled like freshly sliced lemons. I checked my shoulder and I was relieved to see that the injury was only minor, as the crow's claws had only grazed me. I ate and drank a small amount to replenish my strength while trying to decide what my best course of action could be. I kept gazing over towards his throat and wondering what could await me down there. My decision on what I should do was forced on me, as the crows made another attempt to get inside of me. They were using their claws as levers and they were trying to pry open his mouth. I rushed towards the throat as one of the crows was now halfway inside. I ran down the length of the throat, feeling the floor beneath me sink with every footstep. The claws of the crows faded as I got further away from them. I finally reached an immense open space and halted while looking around. I could see his ribs high above me, as they dwarfed any building that I had seen in my life. There were a few cracks noticeable on them as if they had been broken somehow. I heard a thunderous noise above me and looked up to see a giant maw lowering itself towards me. I could see lines of teeth inside that seemed to be swirling around like the bottom of a lawnmower. I began running into the cavern before it could engulf me. I looked over my shoulder and saw that it had stopped and now stood still. I slowed down to catch my breath and spotted more of these creatures in the distance. They made me think of worms that had somehow been turned into demonic entities. They were slowly moving, so all I had to do was stay well away from them to survive. They were using their teeth to eat away at the flesh that lined the cavern. They seemed to grow in size every time they ate a chunk of meat. I found a corner that was well away from anything and had cover on nearly all sides. I knew that it would be dangerous, but I really needed to sleep. I slowly fell asleep, with the picture of that worm's mouth floating above me. I awoke the next morning to what sounded like boulders being flung about. I peered out of my hiding space to see the worms fighting against dozens of four-legged insects. The insects had spikes embedded in their heads which they had used to pierce the worm's hide. Neither side seemed to have an advantage, and soon the cavern was littered with their dead and dying bodies. I grabbed my things and began to make my way towards the far end of the cavern. I had to dodge numerous attacks, but luckily, they were more interested in killing each other than trying to get me. I was almost crushed at one time as one of the insects was thrown through the air, and it landed an arm's throw away from where I was. I reached the far end of the cavern in almost an hour of walking, and I looked back to see the battle was finally over. The worms had been wiped out, and the surviving insects were now feasting on their flesh. I continued on my journey and almost screamed in joy as I saw sunlight up ahead. I made my way through a long, narrow tunnel until I reached the tip and cautiously looked out. There was no sign of any crows, and there was a forest in the distance. I crawled outside and looked back to where I had crawled out of. I laughed to myself, as I thought this guy would definitely be a big hit with the ladies. I managed to make it to the forest, but heard these screeches of the crows who were still circling. I now lie on my couch wondering if I should tell someone. How do you tell the world that you think you have found God's body? My name is Amy and I'm 29, and this is my story. My love for helping people came at a young age, and I've always been very empathetic. I also was very mature for my age growing up. I was always the helpful one of the friend group and often would be the one people came to when they had any issues. So this is what led me to become a 999 operator worker. I felt like being on the receiving end would allow me to use my empathy skills to really help people. I had been there for 4 years and I had loved every day of it. It was a highly stressful job and some of the calls often kept me up at night. But there was this one call that I got. Well, it's the reason that I'm writing this. I need help. I can't talk to anybody personally about this, as they'll think that I'm some crazy woman who needs medicating. But I promise you, I'm not crazy. It started about 3 months ago. It must have been some sort of record for how cold that January evening was. I was working the night shift, 7 p.m. until 3 a.m. This was a one-off, as I usually worked mornings to fit in line with my son, Harry, who is 14, and needs taking and picking up from school. I'm a single mother, a widow, so fitting work around school is quite difficult, but luckily I have a super supportive manager. I'd been on nights only once before, and I had just signed up to work the next week to cover some of Alicia's work, since she just left on her honeymoon. I didn't mind it. The extra money sure helped, and I left Harry with my mom that week. She's been so helpful since my husband Dan had died. Anyway, the first instance happened the first day of the week-long night shifts. A pretty normal night according to the regulars. It was slow and the calls weren't anything of major concern. Commonly your typical broken leg, a stolen purse, those types of crimes. My phone rang. "Hello, 999 ambulance, police or fire," I answered. No response. "Hello, is anyone there?" This was fairly common. Kids trying to pull pranks, but were required to follow protocol and weren't allowed to hang up. There was sharp breathing. "Hello, please help me." A voice of what seems to be a young girl, maybe 12 or 13. It was hard to tell at this point. "Yes, hello, how can I help you? Are you okay?" I asked the girl. "I don't know where I am. The man just left. He'll be back soon, though." I grew concerned. Had the girl been taken? Is she hurt? "Tell me what happened. I can help you," I asked in a calm tone, worried on the inside. "I was playing with my sister on the street. I live with my mom and dad in Earsham, just down the road from the village hall. A man, he drove up to us and asked what we were doing. Asked me where my mom and dad were. I told him that they were inside cooking dinner for us. He got out of the van and asked us if he could play. And then The girl stopped talking mid-sentence. I heard a faint door shut. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. "Are you okay? Is someone there?" I asked her. The phone cut off. The phone went just seconds before I could trace the call. I ring the number back but get the voicemail service. Getting worried, I go and find the night manager to report what just happened. I was told to keep trying the phone, but if it wouldn't connect, then there was nothing that I could do other than to report it to the police, which I did. I finished working at 3 a.m., drove home, and I didn't sleep that night. Thinking about the call all night, I was so worried, and I kept thinking about that little girl. Thinking about her and her sister playing a game and then being taken. The next morning, I got out of bed, picked Harry up from my mom's and told her what had happened. She was distraught too. I didn't let Harry hear as that this wasn't the type of news you would want your son to hear. I took him to school and he kept asking about how my night was at work. I told him that it was fine and I said no more. I think he could tell that I was worried from the hastiness in my voice. When I started work that night, I prayed that the little girl would call again so that I could help her. To my avail, my phone rang. It was her. I remember the caller ID number. "Hello, are you okay? I rang yesterday. I need your help. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 14 and I've been taken from my home by a man I don't know. Please help me, I'm scared." "Hold on, Emily, I'm tracing the call. I'll get you help, I promise." I tried to reassure that I was going to get her home to her parents safely. "He's back. I have to go. Help me, I'm begging you." The phone cut off again. I'm starting to get more and more worried. I can't take much more of this. What if it were my son, Harry? The words "I'm begging you" repeated over and over in my head. All I could hear was the pain in her voice. She sounded so terribly scared. After the phone was disconnected, I managed to get the location of the call and it wasn't far. I patched myself through to the local police station and told them what had happened. But when they asked for the name of the victim, the officer on the phone went silent. Emily Carter, you say? Are you sure about that? The officer sounded confused. Why would he question that? Was there something that I was missing? Yeah, Emily Carter, age 14, from Earsham. Lives just down the road from the village hall, she said. Can you do anything with this information? I know it's not much, but she needs our help. Amy, it is. Emily Carter is an old case, very old. She was taken from her home in Earsham around 30 years ago. Police found the man who took her, but it was too late. Emily's body was recovered near the house that she was held in for over 2 years. The officer awaited my response, but I was speechless. I physically couldn't talk. And that was my last day as an operator. I'm telling you, I'm not crazy. I spoke with Emily. Please believe me. I just need someone to believe me.